afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Kate Gregson, the IATEFL Young Learner and Teenager Special Interest Group Joint Publications Editor, and I'd like to welcome you to the 2020 YLTSIG Annual Web Conference. The IATEFL YLTSIG Committee would like to sincerely thank our 2020 web conference sponsor, StudyCat. Without the support of Paul Granger and the StudyCat team, this global event would not have been possible. You can sign up for a free StudyCat trial account with instant access to award-winning games and activities to engage young learners of English at studycat.com/schools. You can see the link in the chat box. Okay, so our next speaker giving a 30-minute talk is Karina Alemán Medina. Karina holds a BA in English language and an MA in English language teaching. She has taught English in several language centres, as well as public and private educational institutions. During Karina's session, we recommend watching in speaker view, and if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. You are welcome to use the chat box though. Okay, over to you. Please share your screen, Karina, when you're ready. We'll be, yes.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you for being here. And today I'm going to talk to you about my work on an action research project with 6-year-old learners in a small-scale research, where I asked questions and investigate my own teaching practice, guided by works of other experienced researchers who have done a lot in this field, where children become collaborators with the teacher when carrying out classroom research. In this brief talk, I'll try to explain how this teaching strategy could engage learners when deciding the topics of classroom projects, defining or choosing their roles, elaborating scenarios, and performing role plays in these scenarios made by themselves. I'll first like to start with a general overview on teaching English to young learners. The reasons for teaching English to children at an early age may be many, but the most common one usually relies on developing their communication skills, especially during the preschool years. During the last years, there have been some changes in the field of teaching English to young learners. And one change that refers or that concerns to this project is how to teach or how to approach these learners. The recent approaches have been moving away from the traditional ones. And more updated views on how to teach them suggest that children can take more active roles and that they are capable of influencing the direction of a research, according to Ana Maria Pinter, whose seminal work has helped many of us move towards an innovative form for research that includes children in this process. And in such process, children are now considered subjects, not objects, or they are considered center of classroom research. Before I start, I would like to introduce you to the background or context of this project. I'm from Mexico and I'm an English teacher working in a private preschool. The group where this project was carried out consisted of 10 children of 6 years old who had 7.5 hours of English per week. And differently to many other contexts here in Mexico, these children had the opportunity to travel abroad very frequently, and they were constantly in contact with English. And during the previous 2 school years, they learned the basic vocabulary regarding topics like greetings, family, shapes, numbers. And therefore, as their English teacher, I was looking to find a way of engaging these very young learners in a more active way in class. For this reason, I kept a journal, which helped me see what was happening in class. And first, it was observed that the book was above the learner's level and that it mainly focused on teaching them vocabulary. And therefore, the class had turned into a vocabulary list teaching and learning. And most of the time, the oral production was limited to the repetition of isolated words lacking of context. And having found an area, an opportunity to engage them in what they were learning, I decided to look for a way to encourage them not to use only some words in English, but to start using short phrases or short sentences. And at the same time, allowing them to have some control on what they were learning. So the aims of this project were therefore to involve these young learners as active participants and implement the use of role plays to foster classroom interaction. Now, the underlying principle of this research is children as researchers. And the United Nations have stated that children have the right to be informed and consulted in different aspects of their lives, allowing them to express or voice their opinions. This term has been more frequently used during the last decades because children are now taking important roles in research when carrying out these kind of works in the classroom. And recent studies, for example, Kellett's or Alderson studies have shown that they are capable of becoming collaborators in the classroom. There are different forms in which children can participate or be part of research. These are the four forms in which they participate at different degrees. And for this project, the kind of research was with children, which means that they became partners or collaborators with the teacher. So, at this point, you might be wondering how a 6-year-old learner could actually become a co-researcher. Well, there are different simple forms in which children can make decisions in the classroom and therefore become a little bit more active. In one way in which they can participate more or they can make decisions and discuss with others is through role plays. Role plays are a dramatic and a creative teaching strategy, as well as a form considered as a drama in which they can assume the role of others. And it has basically 3 stages: the before, the during, and the after. The before stage is called the briefing stage, in which the teacher explains the activity or models or sets the scene for them. The during is where the participants are encouraged to act out with a very strong characterization, and they are given plenty of opportunities to practice their dialogues. While the debriefing stage, well, in this stage, they are given the opportunity to discuss, to analyze, and share insights. And in some cases, this stage can be carried out using their first language because of their age and their level of English. We could say that the fundamental stage of this process is the moment in which the teacher provides a space or an opportunity for them to share their experiences after activities and reflect on their performance. And this stage can be carried out in circle time meetings, for example, as I did it. The nature of this project is action research, and some of you may have heard this term before, or some of you may have not. But in general words, it can be considered as a reflection of the teacher with the intention of making informed decisions, informed changes in this practice. As it can be seen in this figure, there are some basic steps that are usually followed in action research. Action research always begins with a question of something that can be improved in the classroom. And then the teacher all the data or the evidence related to this issue. After that, the teacher interprets all this information and evaluates the results of making such changes. And well, as I mentioned at the beginning, I am aware that teachers generally don't consider doing classroom research because it might look as a deeply complicated topic, especially if we are talking about very young learners. However, if some of you who are listening to me right now have carried out some kind of research at this level, you might agree with the idea that it is possible and that it also becomes a cycle of questions that enable us as teachers to know a little bit more about an issue or to expand our knowledge. And hopefully this brief talk and all these plenaries in this web conference will awake your interest in asking what can be improved in our classrooms and how we can collect all this evidence and data that shows what is really happening in there. And well, to know what are the results of very small changes. As any other kind of research, it is necessary to collect data or information that evidences these changes. And in this case, the tools or the instruments that were used to collect all this data were first, circle time meetings, or as some of you may know them, focus groups. In some cases, they can be carried out in Spanish. Because this is a moment in which children socialize and they negotiate to decide project topics, or they can negotiate to choose their roles according to the options that the teacher had given them. And well, remember that at this age, they still need to have options, and they still need to have a lot of guidance. And focus groups were also a form to give children the opportunity to share their insights and feelings, to help them feel confident when talking to the teacher in short periods of time. During these meetings, I had the chance to ask children specific questions. For example, what kind of activities do you enjoy doing in class? Or also giving children the opportunity to decide on the kind of materials that they want to use for the projects. Another form of collecting evidence or data through this project was role plays. The role plays, as you may know, are a form of acting out dialogues. In this case, it was, or they were carried out in specific contexts. And the children had to take a vote to decide which topics they would act out. And well, the last form of collecting data or information was the learning portfolio, which in this case was an adaptation of the Common European Framework. And each sample that children included here represented part of their best work that they had done themselves when performing their role play. Also, during when working with our portfolios, children colored some feeling faces to represent how they felt at different moments of the stages. And now I'm going to talk about the practical steps or how this was carried out in the classroom. Leading authors in this field or in this area have suggested that some basic stages to adapt this methodology in the classrooms. But all the adaptations will always depend on our context and on our students' ages and on their preferences. Let me explain you a little bit more about these steps. The first step, children were introduced to the research and they were invited to participate in it. How? Well, they were informed in circle time meetings, and they were also explained the importance of their participation and also their honesty when sharing their opinions. It was very interesting to see that a couple of them mentioned that they needed some time to think about it and to make a decision. So I gave them some space, some time, and fortunately, at the end, they decided to participate in it, after all. Then the teacher asked specific questions to learn about their children's areas of interest. For example, playful activities inside and outside the classroom, or places that they like to visit, or their hobbies, for example. Those first two stages were carried out in circle time meetings in their first language. And during the third and the fourth stages, we focused on allowing them to have some control on what they desired to learn and how they wanted to perform it in class. They also showed how they felt after different stages of the development. And here are the topics that they chose. The first two topics were chosen by them, and the last one was chosen by the teacher. And this happened because I was wondering about the results or the evidence that showed me what was happening when they were making decisions and what happened when the teacher made all the decisions and didn't give them the chance to voice their opinions. And here are the intervention stages. The whole implementation lasted 6 weeks. And they were these stages were repeated during the 3 topics. And first, as you can see, I invited another teacher to observe what was happening in my class during the implementation. Then the children were invited and introduced to the project, and they chose the topics by taking a vote. After that, the learners personalized their portfolios. That means that they made their portfolios theirs. They decorated their portfolios. And then the teacher and the students carried out a second focus group in which they chose their roles and who they wanted to work with. Children practice their dialogues through different techniques, using finger puppets, practicing with different partners, watching videos. So there were a variety of techniques to help them practice those dialogues. And after that, they self-assessed by coloring faces in their portfolios. Children performed their role plays in the scenarios made by themselves. And finally, there and the students married in which they reflected on this experience. And they pasted finally a sample of their work in their language portfolio. Here are some of the comments, real comments that they made. There are some kind or other kinds of research in which children are able to collect the data, analyze the data, and even draw some conclusions about it. However, this was not the case because of their age. And the teacher in this case had to analyze all this data or evidence. And because of time issues, I will share with you a couple of interesting comments that caught my attention because they were real comments that they made during the focus groups and show their engagement and their active participation too. First, the behavioral engagement. As we can see here, there was one student who mentioned friendship. He said, I'm going to talk a lot with my peers and we have to respect each other. Another kind of engagement that was seen was engagement with the project, in which they mentioned comments like this. I know how to mix different colors with paint if we need colors for painting these scenarios. And another was the engagement with their peers. And one of them mentioned, I love it. I liked everything, but sometimes my peers don't speak and I have to remind them of what they should say. They do not learn their dialogues. This is what they mentioned. And in regards to another kind of engagement that was emotional engagement, I have to say that these were unexpected behaviors, okay? Because at the beginning, it was not the aim of this project. However, the evidence shows that there was emotional engagement in these kind of projects in which they were nervous, and they were also showing that they had the chance to share their feelings with others. And these are some of the comments that they made. I felt nervous and ashamed, and I couldn't hear well, so I didn't know when it was my turn. I feel nervous when the teacher is video recording us. And another was, in circle time meetings, we can share our feelings, and the teacher takes us into account in the project. This was another evidence of their active participation and decision making. And here is a comment that they made. When they voted on topics and they chose their peers. In regards to this aspect, there was a student who said, I would like to choose the topics for our projects. I didn't like the topics that you chose, referring to the topic that the teacher had chosen, the third topic. And here is another comment. I like to choose my partner because I can choose a person that does what I don't know how to do well. So it's interesting to see how even if they are very young learners, how they can reflect at their own level. They can reflect on these activities. And well, now the outcomes. Now, regarding the outcomes, it could be observed that involving children as co-researchers could engage them actively when deciding, defining, elaborating, and performing in real scenarios. Making children aware of the value of their participation and opinions help them feel more interested in taking part of the project. They could also recognize respect and friendship and rules of behavior as values that they could learn from each other when working as a group. Some factors that could have influenced their level of performance were the degree of responsibilities and the time that they spent on the scenarios. They also disliked not being taken into account for the election of the third topic, which was decided only by the teacher. However, there were also a good number of comments that showed that they preferred an adult to make those kinds of decisions. So we can say that they still need to have some guidance. Some of them still prefer to have the teacher make some kind of decisions for them. And it also appears that not all the participants want to assume the whole responsibility. And well, as a last word, and something that can be practical, very practical for your classroom if you want also to implement maybe not an action research in your classroom, but small changes, please keep a journal. Observe, and as soon as you can, take notes of what is happening in class. It will help you a lot. Teaching is a multitasking work, and we cannot remember everything that happens or that occurs in class. And learn about your children. Arrange focus groups or circle time meetings frequently in order to learn about more. to learn about them a little bit more. And also be ready to ask specific questions. Be ready to offer children a variety of options. In this way, they could feel they have some control during the activities and also some responsibility on their decisions. I would also say that it's a good idea to include a form of self-assessment in class. For example, a portfolio in which they can collect samples of their best works and color their feeling faces. Is also a way of motivating them to participate and reflect on what they have done. And finally, share the outcomes with other colleagues that might face similar issues. Do not please keep your findings in a drawer. Communicate your results formally or informally, because this is a way in which theory, methodologies, and research become practical. If you want to read a little bit more about this topic, here are some of my references. And thank you for listening. And if you would like to make any comments or questions, please feel free to write them in the Q&A box. Thanks a lot. I'm looking at the Q&A box, and there are some comments here. For example, here is one that says, I think the students need to know a lot of vocabulary to express their ideas. As a second language teacher, I am not that fortunate, and most of the students' vocabulary competence is below average. How can we use this with below average students? As I was commenting, my students also had plenty of vocabulary, but they didn't have maybe the ability to express their ideas. So my recommendation is to allow them to speak their first language. In this case, I allow them to speak Spanish during their reflection time so that they don't feel limited and well, it's a form of doing it. Here is another comment about negotiating a stage. How do we go about it? In L1, I feel that my young learners don't have the language to carry out what task exactly. Yes, that usually happens, and that's usually our questions or worry when we carry out this kind of research, because we say, or we think that our very young learners are not capable of making decisions, and that they cannot decide, or they cannot share, they cannot ask. But it is always a good idea to give them a chance to know what they have to say, to give them a voice. And yes, we can do it in this case in L1, in their first language. I don't know if we have enough time to continue. Here is another comment.
Hi, Karina. I think we've probably finished the time. So thank you very much for a really, really interesting and wonderful talk about really how we can engage learners in action research, and how we need to forget that just because not to forget that just because we're doing action research with young learners, it doesn't mean that we can't actually really involve them in the research. And it is that their voice is valuable, and allowing them to have that voice gives them much more ownership over their learning and a much greater engagement in the research process, and is so wonderfully developmental for the learners as well. So thank you very much for some really excellent tips on how we can do that with our young learners. Thank you very much. We're going to
Thank you.
have a 5-minute break.